My name is Aaliyah Pollock, and I'm an AI data and technology analyst at the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, also known as RICS. At RICS, we're a global professional body with over 110,000 members across the globe, and we work across the entire property life cycle, covering everything from land and real estate to construction and infrastructure. Our mission is to drive knowledge and uphold standards and inspire professionals to build better and more sustainable environments. In my role here at RICS, I'm responsible for analysing the impacts of AI, data and technology on the built and natural environments. And as part of this, I manage the RICS Tech Partner Programme. For those of you who aren't aware, we're a collaborative community, and we produce thought leadership content to help the profession integrate technology into their projects and organisations, making sure that we stay ahead of trends that can drive positive change within the sector. My background myself is within geospatial science. I started in the military working with geospatial data, and I then moved across into the construction industry working on projects like the HS2. This mix of experience has helped me see how tech can really improve the way we build, plan, and manage projects, and it's especially relevant within housing. Today, we're here to talk about how we can streamline the housing process, and that's everything from the initial planning stages all the way to post-occupancy care. I'm looking forward to exploring how tech can make housing projects more efficient and sustainable, and also successful for everyone that's involved. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists, starting with Dean.
Hi everyone. My name is Dean Ward. I'm the founder and CEO of DCW Group, and more recently founder and CEO of Propsmart.com, which is a research and development tool that speeds up the due diligence and identification process of buying land and property.
Thank you very much. Nigel?
Hello, I'm Nigel Walley. I run a digital property logbook company called Chimni, and I also chair the UK's Residential Logbook Association, which is the trade body for all of the new companies that have arrived in the UK market, looking at providing homeowners with digital property logbooks.
Great stuff. And finally, David.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for being invited on the panel. I'm the founder and CEO of Spaciable. We, our logbook company, facing off against new build. My background is consulting, banking, private equity, high levels of government advisory, and it's been an interesting one along the tech journey of how to enable both on a government housing association level and also, high quality new builds. So thanks again.
Thank you very much to our panelists for their introductions. Let's get started. So the process of developing housing is very complex and spans over several stages, that being planning, design, construction, the sales and post-occupancy care. At each stage, there are pain points that can delay projects, that can increase costs and pretty much stress everyone out from all the way from developers to eventual residents. For instance, planning approvals in the UK, they take 8 to 13 months on average. And we're also facing major skill shortages in construction with over 200,000 workers needed by 2025. Meanwhile, residents face challenges after they move in, often struggling with poor communication during aftercare or delayed maintenance services. On top of this, the growing demand for homes means that developers are balancing speed with delivery, a challenging situation for any person. So, Dean, on this topic, I'd like to start off with you with the first question. Could you provide a bit of an overview of the current housing development process from planning through to move-in and highlight some of the key challenges that you've experienced people face at each stage in this life cycle?
Well, it's a really interesting one, and it's a shame we haven't got about 3 days to talk about it because there's so much information involved in it. So if I focus on my own experience within the industry, I've been in the industry on that very much that design, feasibility, and resale side of the process for the last 20 plus years. And what is very, very apparent that it seems to be a process that is quite archaic, if I'm honest. It seems that we are very much sort of hand and master to local authorities with their planning departments who are not necessarily, I think the assumption is always that, give us a reason to grant, opposed to a reason or assume yes and then give me a reason that we can't. I think there needs to be a culture change. Now that culture change, I think, goes hand in hand with not only sort of government level lobbying, but I think more importantly is data provision at the earliest outset. So something that we've been working on for a long time is the ability to be able to pull in all of the necessary ports of data across the industry, because a lot of the data is public domain. Now, the developers, and I've had to do this myself when working out whether a scheme is viable or not, all of these sort of arms of data fill in with every single part of the process. So if we sort of separate planning out for the time being, but we look at the actual scheme viability. So let's say a developer gets a piece of land across their desk and they basically want a quick snapshot on whether they should start to pursue that due diligence process. So we need to understand, are the schemes allocated? What's the chances of them being allocated? What sort of properties can they look to put on that particular scheme? What ones are the most feasible ones to put on there? Are they big enough? Are they small enough? Geodemographic data, socio-demographic data. All of these bits of information are very, very important to really steer that design element. So what I find at the moment is there seems to be an awful lot of regulation keep coming into the various different parts of the process. So if we take Wales, where I'm based, for instance, there's a lot more sort of planning policy that is, in my view, getting in the way of progression. We have phosphates, we have the SUDs and SABs information that needs to be mapped into it, and it's hitting scheme viability right at the outset. And the only place where that value comes off of is the overall land value. So landowners are now more reluctant to be able to either promote or sell their land for development because they're not going to get the returns that they need. So I'm very much of the opinion that if we can digitize that process as much as we can and have as much data at the front end of the process, then it will have a knock-on effect whilst government bodies or public sector, private sector coordination to try and sort of, modernize the industry to make that housing process more streamlined, but more sort of relevant data that everybody is looking at the earliest point.
Thanks, Dean. And Nigel, moving across to you, Dean's really touched on there the real importance of data, and technology is generally a driver and a way is a better way for us to capture that data. So in terms of property management and transactions, how well would you say the housing sector is currently utilizing digital tools? And what would you say are the main pain points, and what technology solutions have the potential to improve these areas?
And I think we have to be realistic that the housing sector is pretty late into the game in terms of using digital technology. If we compare it to other industries, there are other industries who are going through their third and fourth digital revolution, whilst housing is really struggling to get out of the blocks. But there's a lot going on, so I don't want to diminish that. And if we just look at the broad context for a minute, the whole push within national and local government for open data is a background context which is going to be hugely transformative. There's so much data on land and property is buried in still in old filing cabinets and PDFs, and so we are absolutely behind the government's push to democratize data. That every single bit of information that sits within the public sector or in the commercial sector should be, if it's public data, should be available online and immediate. So we're moving slowly from a position where it might take 25 weeks to pull together all the relevant information on a scheme before it's built, let alone when it hits the sales process. We're moving slowly to a point where all of that information could and should be available all the time in real time. It may take a decade, because there's a lot of slow moving players in the mix, particularly at local authority level. But we are finally moving in the right direction. Then on top of that, we've got new tools arriving like AI, being able to analyze huge amounts of data and pull insights out of it, which I think is going to be transformative. And we've also got kind of broad impacting tools like BIM arriving through the construction design stage. And we're as a property logbook company, we're really excited about BIM. We've been doing some work looking at how it's going to impact at the user end. And I think one of the really interesting movements that is beginning to impact all stages, including the sales stage, is this idea that through things like BIM, data can flow through all of these steps that we've been talking about. Design and construction of housing, as you say, starts with design, planning, research, and goes through all the construction stages, then through to marketing and sales. And historically, they were quite discrete, separate operations that very little information was moved simply between those things. But what we're all working on, I think, is a world in which data and information starts off in the early planning stage and is transferred in what the techies would call straight through processing, and ends up at every stage of the process just being handed on in data form to the next stage. And the buying and selling industry is, of course, it's a parallel industry that's going through its own digitization. And they are slowly building the tools by which conveyancers and estate agents use this data. But we're moving towards a situation where data that starts off in the processes Dean was talking about in the very early days should eventually move through a process, seamlessly pass from one to another in standard formats, using standard methods of connection, through to the point where a conveyancer and estate agent can publish that data to a potential buyer. And then, in the beautiful world of digital property logbooks, that data can be given to a user effectively as a user manual.
Nigel, I was just going to ask you would you be able to define a property logbook, a digital property logbook, for our listeners that might not be aware of what one is?
Yeah, happy to. And again, I'll be interested that David and I probably have similar-ish kind of definitions, but maybe slightly different. But the idea is that every homeowner should have a secure digital record which contains either all the data related to their home or connections with permission to access of all publicly held data about their home. So it becomes effectively both a digital source of all truth about that property, a digital record of that property, and for some operators of logbook companies, effectively a digital companion piece to help them run that property. And now you have to be careful with that definition, because there's 8 or 9 logbook companies in the UK. We all do things slightly differently, but at core, that idea of a secure digital record that everyone has that gives them access to all the data is kind of the key thing.
Yes, it's all about building trust. David, is there a different way that you define a?
I have to agree with Nigel's definition. I think just to add to that, the ownership and the security of that data as well. Where does that sit? And we see it sitting with the holder of the property at that particular time, and the ability to secure and use that data and that information about when you're taking care of that asset is the key thing. And what does that lead to? It leads to being able to have, and I'll talk about a seamless home and to be able to interact. And Nigel talked about APIs and connections and stakeholders. You're allowed to unlock that data and then get services and goods around the home, and the ability to have that seamless interaction, and try and reduce your admin and protect the home and the life of that home. So I don't disagree with what Nigel said. In fact, support that. I just building on that answer on how it's used and where that data goes and the security of that data.
Thanks, David. Taking a step back, looking at the broader housing life cycle, what would you say are the biggest challenges? We've heard from Dean and Nigel. What would you say are the biggest obstacles, especially those that affect residents all the way to post-residency?
Yeah, just picking up bits that Nigel and Dean talked about, was the use of data and the use of technology as you move through that life cycle. And I think the data, build, technology, all comes along that broader housing life cycle. And where does that end up in the arena of customer service? Is there build quality issues that cause a lot of customer care problems further down the track around defect management? There's a whole sequence in that life cycle. And I think the key thing coming out the other end is to two big areas, and you go from a high end, and we do anything from a very high end development that might have a concierge and use our app, as a very concierge type tool, high quality of customer service, and they're able to put resources to it and use technology, to perhaps the other end where we've got customers around housing associations who are just fighting day to day on their customer care. They're dealing with these, and I just recently attended the Homes UK conference, and they're dealing with these huge issues around mold and damp and fire safety. And look, I won't go into some of the incidences. I think we're all aware, but they're having to really fight fires, and they don't get a chance to step back because of the resource constraints that they have to really get ahead of that wave. They're always just fighting. So resources is a key thing. Build quality, and there's a level of customer expectation as well, and that customer expectation is changing a lot, that we see, at the higher end or the mid end. People are spending, it's the biggest ticket item they're ever going to buy, and they believe, rightly so, that they should have a really great customer experience and quality care around that. And that's even extended now to HAs and social housing, because there is an expectation that there is a level of duty of care, customer care, and again, resources get hit. But the good news, and I'm sure us as a panel will talk about that a little bit more, is how is technology helping those changes to overall housing experience, and what can we do around that? So so that would be what I would suggest.
Thanks, David. So no, Nigel had mentioned that we're pretty slow to the game when it comes down to adopting technology and being innovative. As we've discussed, tech has it's got great potential to solve some of the housing sector's challenges, yet its adoption it's very slow. Barriers like high upfront costs, resistance to change, and lack of skilled workers are often key hurdles that affect this change. For example, while modern methods of construction can reduce build times by 30%, the initial costs often deter smaller developers. At the same time, regulatory frameworks, while necessary, can sometimes prevent innovation if they aren't aligned with emerging technologies. So, Dean, I'd like to start this section off with you. I know we've chatted about this previously. What would you say are the main barriers to adopting modern methods of construction and other tech innovations in housing development?
I think if we look at the MMC route first, I think the MMC is, I think we're all deep down thinking MMC is a good thing. It's not the previous years of modular homes all going wrong, etc., and things like that. And you hear these mystical predictions that houses can be built in 7 days and things like that. I think if we're all realistic, it's not 7 days, but the one thing that we can agree on is it is quicker. And I think what's demonstrated it quite a lot is, if we cast our minds back to the building of Nightingale hospitals at COVID times, is we proved by eradicating red tape and barriers to entry and barriers to delivery that we can build a Nightingale hospital in 3 weeks, but we can't build a house in less than 6 months. So it's a very, very strong statement that I think the adoption of MMC needs to come both as a leak within planning. Planning is, we are starting to see that they are starting to ask for more sustainable housing developments, sustainable processes, etc. Biodiversity, net gain, all of the really fun stuff. But one thing that it always comes back to, and I speak with a lot of developers, and I was a PLC developer for a long time, and it still always boils back to capital and how much things cost. We all know that the increase in build costs over since the war in Ukraine and Russia, etc., has had an impact on build cost. Build cost have rocketed up in costs, and it's tougher and tougher to get scheme viability to work. But the key to this is I was speaking with a senior figure at one of the PLC, one of the big fives, and their response saying, look, we have the appetite to build using modern methods of construction, modular, whatever it may be, but they still have to report to their shareholders. If they're building a traditional house for, a sort of 800 to 1,500 pounds a meter or whatever it may be, the comparable cost for a modern method of construction, so let's use modular, are running up at £2,500 to £3,000 a meter. So there's still that cost element, and the only way for us to be able to bring that cost element down is by either, planners turning around and saying it's got to be modular or it's got to be an MMC process, or bring the cost down just by pure volume. That volume adoption is the only way that I think those costs are ever going to come down. We all know that, we're in a climate crisis. We all know that, water levels are rising and CO2 is rising and, and ozone and all of the stuff that we're hearing of. I think it's just little changes like that and little thought process changes that can make such a huge difference when it comes to this. And, you have to look at retrofit. Retrofit is a big thing now, but, we look at, procurement bodies within local authorities and, different public sector frameworks. They don't really understand what is needed from a retrofit angle. We had an example only a couple of weeks ago where a procurement body in Wales basically was stipulating that a retrofit assessor needed to be PASS accredited. Well, there is no accreditation for a PASS accredited. There's no PASS accreditation for a retrofit assessor. They've just got to be familiar with PASS. So it is it's that demystification piece that needs to, to happen, not just with industry professionals, but procurement bodies, local authorities, government, and it just needs to be, dare I say it, simplified.
You've touched on there some of the regulations. So Nigel, moving across to you, continuing on this piece, how would you say that regulatory frameworks like some of those that emerged post-Grenfell and also those in response to net zero targets, how would you say that they're impacting the adoption of technology within the housing sector?
That's a really interesting question. Is there a correlation between recent regulatory frameworks and tech adoption? Because none of them have actually targeted tech adoption directly. And I'm not sure that you could actually draw a positive correlation between those two things. I'm very conscious that if you are a developer of residential housing in any form or any part of the chain, that you are currently assailed with new regulations, whether it's the Building Safety Act, the Fire Safety Act, all of the new things that have arrived have brought nothing but admin headaches and increased cost. I mean, we can't avoid the fact that that is the case, but that is the problem of developing homes in a sophisticated economy like ours, where there is expectations, particularly expectations of safety and well-being. So energy efficiency itself has brought new sets of regulations, and what it hasn't done is it hasn't engendered a conversation about what performance means in any of those things that is anything other than a conversation between developers and government. So I still don't get a sense that people who are buying homes or moving in as tenants have any sense of what their expectations could and should be around the performance of those homes. And all you ever hear about is actually where something goes wrong. Was it David mentioning mold and damp and things? So you hear those cases where something goes wrong, but what we haven't engendered is any sense of what a homeowner or a resident's expectation could and should be, and that really hasn't come out of any of the legislation. And I think probably negatively, one of the problems with having such a complex framework of regulations around building homes is that because it costs money and takes time, it does actually put off adoption of other things. Our particular focus has been on the use of BIM through the design and construction process, and because so much of the residential property industry is actually populated by small and medium-sized enterprises, they are without doubt put off by the cost of it. It's not easy for an organisation that's never used BIM before to adopt it, because it's new software. Software has to be bought, staff have to be trained, the expectations around how to use it have to change and flow through the system. So it's probably a decade of slow adoption that makes it slowly roll out. But as I say, I can't draw a positive link between the explosion of regulations facing developers and the need to use NOC. So unless you're going to enforce it, make it happen. And I would point out that in France, in Belgium, and various other European countries, logbooks, for instance, have now been mandated. So mandated for all new homes. You can't sell a new home without providing the buyer of that home with a digital property logbook. Same in Belgium, and in France and Belgium also. If you're selling an existing home and that home has had retrofit sufficient that its EPC has been upgraded, you also have to provide a logbook which shows all the work and all the information relating to it. So we are seeing in the countries around us, we are seeing a move towards actually mandating outcomes. And I think we're going to have to move that. If we want it to happen in the UK, I think the government's going to have to move to that position.
Yeah, thanks. David, moving across to you, both Dean and Nigel there have mentioned like cost is one of the main drivers to adoption. Looking at that and also some of the points that Nigel just mentioned, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how we can drive tech adoption. Do you think for us to reduce the cost, it's going to come from incentives, carrots, or regulatory measures or sticks?
Yeah, such a good question as far as the carrot and the stick approach. I guess just referencing what Nigel was talking about there, the technology adoption I think really comes down to two key drivers. One is shareholder value and profits in the private sector, which everybody and home building has been a laggard of technology adoption, but there are people there that are looking at technology and does it increase my bottom line, as compared to the social housing side. How can technology adoption allow me to service my customers, meet my KPIs and the key performance indicators around social care, around vulnerable adults and others. So look, I think the thing is that technology adoption needs to be started with those two conversations, and I think it's up to us technology providers to challenge home developers on new ways of tech. It is a hard job. I'm sure Dean and Nigel would agree with me that being in prop tech is a hard thing to push out, but we have to continue showing those business cases, and look, AI is going to be mentioned probably a few times in this conversation, but look, I believe there is a wave coming that allows a lot of cost savings, a lot of better customer service, through the use of AI, and it'll be interesting to see the disruption in the market with home builders and build in general and the housing industry about how quickly that tech is adopted and who gets displaced, who gets the better profits, who is able to build more homes, who's able to provide better customer service. So we live in interesting times, but the key drivers are depending on the industry that you're in.
Thanks, David. So moving on, innovation in housing isn't just about efficiency. It's about creating homes that are sustainable, adaptable, and ultimately future-proof. Yet, for many in the industry, the costs and risks, as we've talked about, the costs and risks associated with adopting new technologies is a very big hurdle. For example, let's take digital twins, which are virtual replicas of physical buildings. They can revolutionize design and maintenance, but implementing these systems requires huge investments and expertise. But on the flip side, data shows that innovative construction techniques like modular housing could be a key solution to the UK's housing crisis. MMC could deliver quality homes faster while meeting sustainability targets. But still, these innovations can't gain traction without wider collaboration between governments, the industry, and tech providers. So, Dean, just going back to one of the points you mentioned previously, you talked about the skills gap. Do you think in any way technology could assist with this upskilling of the workforce to meet the demands of modern methods of construction and other innovations? And if so, what kind of training or initiatives would be needed to equip workers for the future?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely needed because I talk an awful lot about this in my in one of my other roles. I chair the Regional Learning Skills Partnership, which is part of Swansea Bay City Deal, and I chair the construction cluster. And the sole purpose of that group is to sort of demystify the opportunities for training within the construction sector. And we often talk about the construction sector and housing isn't sexy. Everybody automatically presumes that you're a bricklayer out in the freezing cold and getting your hands dirty in the mud and all of that sort of stuff. There's such a diverse roles within the construction sector that are freely available through the things like the PLAs and different colleges. I think that the challenges with the skills is very much it's the adoption of tapping into the funding lines that are there. So if I use Wales as an example, Wales has what they call PLA funding, which is personal learning accounts, where if you are building a career in a specific sector, you can get your courses funded completely 100%. Okay, now as long as you can match fund it, so the employer has to match fund, i.e. the salary, they then can essentially earn and learn and get a qualification at the end of it. Sounds wonderful on the face of it. However, in reality, the colleges, obviously from an economies of scale perspective, they can only put a course on if they have a minimum number of students. Now, a large proportion of businesses in the construction sector, especially here in Wales, I think 60% of SMEs, those 60% SMEs are not in a position to put 5 members of staff. They might only have 2 or 3. So there's an awful lot of work going on at the moment is how to plug that gap between the SMEs and the larger companies, but how to upskill and train those small to medium-sized companies who have the 1s, the 2s, the 3 members of staff. And I think that's where technology comes in. I've looked at a number of different sort of solutions that can speed that learning capability up. Online training, still getting qualifications, but on a learn at your own pace sort of thing. Something that Energy Trust does a lot of. Accreditation bodies like Elmhurst, they all do very, very similar things, and they're pretty freely available. However, there is the implementation of digital twins and almost digital classroom environments, and almost having their own avatar as a teacher, for want of a better word. We were engaging with a company not so long back called Academy, and it's with double I on the end because it's the Welsh version. And it's something that they're using AI, machine learning, digital twins in order to create that online digital learning environment, which it's more freely available. It's not only it's net zero positive because it's ultimately nobody has to get in a car to learn. They're still engaging with course content. They're getting a qualification at the end of it, but they're actually digitizing that front end, which I talk an awful lot about at board level, about finding that low hanging fruit. That low hanging fruit where you can get a qualification in the shortest amount of time possible, but alleviating that budgetary constraint at college level. But also I think there's a big piece around the demystification of what grants are on offer, what funding is on offer from government level. And ultimately, I think we've got a responsibility as companies within the construction and housing sector to, we've got a duty of care to people who want to come in at the youngest possible level. engage with schools at sort of primary school level and all the way up to, converting learners from different sectors. We've got a prime example, our EPC division. I've got a member of staff who was a carpenter and joiner by trade. He's also a retired teacher, and his knees were giving out. And he said, look, I need to look at something different. So we retrained him into becoming a DEA assessor and non-domestic energy assessor. And he's now on the pathway now to become a retrofit assessor. So, there's so much option out there, but for the small to medium-sized enterprise, the incentive for them to be able to upskill and grow and bring more staff in needs to be demystified. It needs to be made easier.
Thanks, Dean. Nigel, moving across to you, Dean mentioned there, and David's also mentioned some of the use cases of AI. And with the increasing use of technologies like AI, there is a security risk, or there is a perceived security risk. So given the role of data in property transactions and management, how can the industry ensure that technological innovation doesn't compromise the security and privacy, especially when working with sensitive data?
It's a great question, and it's one with my trade body hat on that we've already been flagging up as an issue that the industry looks at. There is already huge amount of abuse of data in the property industry, and there is an assumption in a world of open data and net zero that we should make loads more data public and available, and it's something that really concerns us. That we mentioned earlier on, both David and I flagged up that we believe that data and insight around a particular property is the property of the property owner, and there is, as I say, an assumption that a huge amount of data is going to be just washed out into the public sector, and I think that we're going to end up with some difficult court cases if we're not careful. And I think we need within the education that Dean spoke about, we do need more of a conversation about the ethics of data in property and construction, the ethics of data in residential property in particular, because we're dealing with people's homes, and we haven't seen that discussion yet. So when we're talking about educating people, yes, we support the education, the adoption of skills, the improvement of skills, particularly around AI. But we do need this conversation about data ethics, because we're dealing with people's homes, and we've seen it both in new build and in retrofit. There is an assumption that we should make all smart meter data available so people can use it and do analysis. But that's literally data that describes the way people live in their homes. So we always start with the assumption that all of that data should actually be private and not shareable, unless the homeowner opts to include their data into some form of analysis. But we're seeing an awful lot of opt-in by default on things like utility contracts that need to be looked at. But even some of the major players, like the Land Registry publishes price paid data, and the ICO have already declared that price paid data is private data, it's personal finance data, shouldn't be published under an open government license. But the Land Registry, they have looked at it and done an internal review and said, no, we're fine. So they are contributing an ICO ruling and publishing personal data because it suits them commercially, and our industry is just awash with this kind of nonsense. So I think privacy and data ethics is going to be a conversation that we need more about. So because, as I said earlier on, there will be court cases.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next section, but don't worry, David, I'll start off with you on this question. So property transactions in the UK can suffer from huge delays and inefficiencies. I've recently moved into my house. Luckily, I had it easy, but my brother, for example, was going for the process for like 8 months. It's crazy. So yeah, it suffers from delays and inefficiencies, with legal finalizations taking months to complete. By comparison, we've got countries like Estonia that have adopted a digital first approach, enabling seamless property transactions in just a few days. Digitization, such as the introduction of digital property logbooks that Nigel's spoken about, they present a huge opportunity to improve transparency, security, and efficiency, but still adoption remains inconsistent. So, David, I'll start off with you on this section. And we've touched on sustainability a little bit throughout this panel, but I'd like to dig into this a little bit more. So, in your view, what would you say is the role of innovation and technology in improving long-term sustainability and satisfaction of residents in new developments?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Nigel just talked a lot about data and the fact that it can be personable and who it belongs to. I think there is on the other side and not not giving value to Nigel's comments as well. But on the other side, there's a lot of data that isn't shared and a lot of data that isn't analyzed and you see that in new build that that there is a lot of data about the home, about the development that have sustainability impacts, that have custom service impacts further down the line, and while a lot of that data is private and personal, there's a lot of data that should be there for the ongoing management of the development or the ongoing management of the home. And there's a lot of talk about the golden thread and the materials that are used within a home, and it's got huge sustainability knock-ons, and how down to even the customer. How does the customer use that home? Has the home been built not looking at its longer term sustainability, but really as a box with a couple of bathrooms and a couple of bedrooms, and actually there is some flaws around what it's been built out of, and does the homeowner, does the maintenance of that home, the people maintaining that home or development, do they have the information and the data around that to make good sustainable choices for the life cycle of that home?
Thanks, David. And Dean, moving across to you, looking at the speed of transactions. You mentioned in our previous call about housing packs, which I'd never heard of. So yeah, in the past, housing packs were commonly used to speed up the property transaction process. Could you explain a bit more about what this was like and how they could be integrated into modern practices to speed up the process, particularly with advancements in digital solutions?
I'm very much of the era where I remember and was physically working when home information packs were a thing, and in a way, if I back in my early days when I was an estate agent, I know, don't hold it against me, but home information packs were actually really good for the housing market. The reason being is because it eradicated the sort of test the market sellers, for want of a better word. What it did is they didn't want to go spending £400 to put the house on the market, and the houses that were on the market, the transaction levels went up because the people were motivated to sell, which in turn then automatically brought motivated buyers. Now, what the decision to move away from home information packs was an interesting one, and retaining the EPC part, which is all well and good, but what it did is it opened the door to a huge amount of energy performance assessors who are no longer assessors, who basically were just sort of guessing what houses were, what their energy efficiency measures were, what, even to the point what size they were. We've come across houses that they're allowed a 5% tolerance on their floor space, and they've been coming in at 15, 20, 25% difference in floor size, which makes that EPC unviable. Now, what I think there's a real opportunity there to be able to digitize that front end information, which it's you hear things like a property information pack that estate agents used to put together. You've got technology out there like Sprift, etc., which are helping with market appraisal reports. But I think more importantly is it allows sort of that freedom of information that is specific to the property that somebody is looking at buying, because there's a huge amount of transactional data out there that shows the average time spent on trying to find key bits of information about a property that make it, that just add more time to the conveyances process to be able to get a transaction through. What I find is that access to data is sometimes easy to find, and it's sometimes more difficult to find. But what we're especially finding is there is an awful lot of companies out there who are sort of deploying AI crawlers, machine learning, that sort of thing, and pulling vast sums of data together and then packaging them up and then selling them out, via API or whatever it is. And, the amount of money that is being, the amount of data that is being monetized but not necessarily giving the direct reward and seeing that sort of, that ethical data set being used in order for a transaction to be made quicker. All we're seeing this is it's very much on a sort of commercial first thought process. I think there's so much margin to be able to learn from other countries in the world that are really leading the field on sort of property information. So if we use Poland as an example, there's an awful lot of people over the last few years, etc., who have got this incorrect assumption that Poland is behind the curve. It's the complete opposite, because their information reports that they have in each zoned area, you can go online in Poland and pay €10 for a report that tells you that particular zone area that you're looking at buying. It will tell you where the utilities are. It will tell you where all the sewage and drainage is. It will show you where all of the necessary utility information is. It will tell you how big it is. It will tell you whether it's in a flood zone. It will tell you everything that you need for the sake of €10, and you can have it instantly. And it's an unbelievable bit of technology. I think they've mapped something like 94% of Poland. So I'm like, actually, we need to look a bit further afield to be able to learn how they've done that and bring that into the UK housing market, because one of the largest problems that I see if you look at just the technical reports, when you're putting together ground contamination surveys, SI reports, ecology reports, flooding reports, they're all out there, but all of the consultants out there, they're charging for the same report over and over again, because that's what the planners are dictating. If there was a centralized database with all of that data there, they could bring that in, and the user and the owner or the purchaser of the land, the developer, whoever it may be, has access to that data in order to speed that piece of the process up. Because at the moment, it's way too long.
Thanks. And this leads me on to a very good question, actually, for Nigel. What I was going to say is, so given the rise of property data platforms, what regulations would you say are needed to protect customers' personal information while ensuring transparency in property transactions? Ultimately, how can we ensure that that we balance security with the free flow of information?
Well, I think we should remember that when somebody wants to sell their home, they're agreeing to put information in the market. So to a certain extent, the transaction point is not the point where we're most worried, because people, to sell your home, you have to describe it. You have to say certain things, and the law is pretty clear about what information you have to provide to a buyer to make that transaction happen. So to a certain extent, the transaction point isn't necessarily a data security point of view. Just picking up on something Dean said earlier on, I do want to flag up that for the last 6 years, the home buying and selling industry has been trying to digitize itself, and has been trying to create a new digital version of what we were talking about, the home information packs. So there's been a huge amount of effort to not a great success amongst various players. Now, but the big problem we've got is there is no regulator for this industry. There's no regulator with the power to actually make this happen. And if we look at those countries where, like Poland, like Estonia, like Norway and Sweden, they do a really good job of digitizing their transaction process. It's because they had a strong regulator who came in and said what should happen and made it happen. And what we've got at the moment is we've got a whole group of warring trade bodies, the Law Society and the Conveyancing Association, who can't agree on standards and can't agree that makes this happen. And sitting in the middle of it is a huge amount of conveyancers and estate agents who aren't doing anything because they don't see the need to it. The whole industry is based around case management systems run by a whole group of private companies. But they're not going to change unless they're told to by their clients, and their clients aren't going to change because it costs money and no one's telling them they have to do it. So at the moment we are stuck in a kind of an 8-year mishmash of non-progress. And if you compare it to the financial services industry, which over the last decade has had an absolute revolution in open banking and open finance, and the reason it had that revolution is because it had a regulator. And the regulator came in 10 years ago, said, here's what's going to have to happen. They funded a set of trials of open data in personal finance, and they made it happen. So, until there is some firm regulation to make digitization happen in the property transaction industry, ain't going to happen.
Good point. I've got another question though. Taking a look at digital property logbooks, and Nigel, I'll ask you this question again. How would you say that we build trust in this data? So, say in a perfect world where everyone is using digital property logbooks, or in the countries, European countries that you mentioned, where they're adopted widely, how do we ensure that the data is accurate? Is it metadata? How do we ensure the consistency of this data too?
I'll throw a couple of answers, and I'm sure Dave's got a similar kind of opinion on it too. First of all, I don't understand why people keep throwing the question of trust at property logbooks. Currently, when you sell a property, your conveyancer sends you a form you fill out with a biro and you send it back to them, and then they sell the property. Suddenly, because we're doing it digitally, everyone's saying, oh, how do we trust this data? You were trusting it a minute ago, and I filled it out with a felt tip pen, mate. So why aren't you trusting it now? Because I want to send it to you via an API. So first of all, trust is one of those red herrings that's thrown up by the conveyancing industry around this data to justify not doing anything. Secondly, there are mechanisms by which we can actually capture information about where this information came from. So if we had the surveying industry coming to the table and actually doing something digitally, it would help. So if the surveying industry were to be able to upload the contents of a survey into a property logbook with information about who supplied it and when they did it, it would be really helpful. If the EPC industry were able to do this, so you do an EPC, press a button, upload the information into a logbook via API with metadata on who supplied it and when they supplied it. We would have logbooks full of trustable, verifiable data from all the sources. But at the moment, there is no RICS members coming to the table with digital solutions for this. There's no EPC people coming to do it. So our logbooks are sitting here, API friendly, ready to accept all the data. And all we're hearing about is trust. It's the wrong question.
Thanks. I can see your passion there, Nigel. David, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think the thing is, and I agree with what Nigel just said, is that there are different data users of the data. And at the end of the day, you can see where that data has come from, or within the record of the data. Has it been checked by a solicitor? Has it been signed off as far as a transactional process? Is it something that somebody's just noted down, off the side of it? So, at the end of it, it's just understanding, quite a bit more about where that data's come from and what sort of quality processes have been through. I think when you start to talk about metadata and the quality of metadata, then that's something different. But with AI tools, with data cleansing tools, and a lot of those companies that are operating around that, that quality of data is getting a lot better as we move along. And it's all about making a start, isn't it? At the moment, too many self-interest groups, confusing murking the waters, and we're at where we're at. We're taking a long time to do planning. We're taking a long time to put a transaction through, and frankly, it's embarrassing as compared to, as Dean said, these countries that we perceive as backward or behind us, but actually, we've got a lot to learn.
I completely echo what's been said. I think that data is captured at so many different levels, but then it's just kind of sits in a box or sits in a conveyance file or whatever it is, and that data can be used in the right way. We can single-handedly tackle the housing crisis. We can speed the processes up. My concern and my worry has always been that this is a bit of a fleeting statement against conveyancers, so apologize to any conveyancers who are watching, but conveyancers, if we make that data freely available, you're going to get a lot of kickback from conveyancers because their local search fees that they charge are going to be dramatically diminished. because ultimately, you know, they ask for £400 on account or £1,000 on account or whatever region it is, when we all know that a property search doesn't cost anywhere near that. You know, so it's that economy and that cost basis again that, you know, that I find it's a commercial problem, but it's also a freedom problem, because ultimately when you're buying a house, you know, it's regulated. You wouldn't think about going to a doctor if they didn't have a PhD. You wouldn't think about going to a doctor, you know, an orthodontist, if they didn't have their degree there, or if you go into an optician, they'd be a licensed optometrist. You know, why aren't estate agents and conveyancers heavily licensed? You know, because the estate agents are the ones that are feeding this information into the, you know, into those sort of valuation reports at the start. But how do they know that it's accurate? You know, it's not like the US. You know, the US, you have to be a licensed realtor and you spend a huge amount of money doing it, in order to, you know, it's treated as a profession. You know, unfortunately, you know, to be an estate agent, you could pretty much just set up an estate agency thing, do a Property Misdescriptions Act case, and that's it. You know, so it's very, very important, I think, that front end data capture needs to be regulated. I think the regulation idea is highly important.
Yeah, and just as a final point, David, I'm going to fire this one back to you. So, putting this into perspective, how would you say that data can be used more effectively to create this better feedback loop between all the stakeholders, that being developers, customers, property managers, particularly in post-occupancy? And also, how do we ensure that that data is useful for long-term property management?
Yeah, look, I think you're getting a little bit of a feel, or hope the listeners are, is from the three of us, is, you know, collect the data early, collect it right, you know, follow it through the process, keep collecting it as you move through, and what comes of that is that we know more about the home. I talked about the sustainability bits, you know, the how to service that home, how to service the development. You know, there is consequences of that in efficiency, in the build efficiency, in the servicing efficiency. You know, feedback loops that the systems like Nigel and I do, that collect data from the customers and understand what are the customers after, and we haven't talked about the personalization of data, and how that, you know, that's going to be a huge area going forward, particularly with AI. But, you know, the personalization of the actual service that the customer's getting at the end of the day, and understanding the data points around living in the home, who that person is, who that home is, and that constant feedback loop that builds on that customer experience, and makes the home more seamless, more enjoyable, more efficient, more sustainable, you know, at the end of the day. And you know, data is key to that. And I think with, you know, that's the thing that unlocks the ability for AI analysis, and you know, and other analysis that that, you know, will cause a shift change through customer service, through build, modern methods of construction, sustainability. So, you know, it all starts with that, and that feedback loop that you talked about, you know, just builds on that data, and allows companies to you know, to better create, you know, products for whatever we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, David. We'll definitely pick up that whole AI and customization piece on another discussion. But today, thank you to our panelists. It's been great hearing your thoughts on the challenges and the opportunities of technology within the housing sector, from development to all the way to post-occupancy care. It's clear that we've got a lot of work to do, especially when it comes to bridging that skills gap that Dee mentioned, and navigating these regulations. But there's potential solutions, particularly with technology and data at our fingertips. So to everyone in the audience, thanks for your engagement, and let's keep pushing for better homes, better data, better technology as we look ahead to the future. This is just the beginning of a conversation, and I look forward to seeing how we can continue to innovate and work together in this space. So thank you very much to our panelists.